Welcome to Cannabis 360, your source for cannabis and psychedelic industry news, interviews, and insights. Visit canna360.ca and sign up to receive free access to the entire Cannabis 360 catalog. In this episode of High Fidelity, we connect with Francesco Caruso, Director of Retail for Stok'd Cannabis. Francesco will discuss inventory management techniques and best practices for a cannabis retail store.
Okay, Francesco, thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you here. Now, Francesco, you are the Director of Retail for Stok'd Cannabis. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and a bit about your background in the cannabis industry, how you got into it.
Thank you very much, and Connor, thanks for having me on today. This is awesome. So I'm glad that we're able to sit down and have this chat for sure. A little bit about me and Stok'd. Where to start? I mean, been a cannabis advocate since I can remember. Obviously, you kind of have that pre-legalization story, but really dives and starts up at the beginning of legalization. Got myself in the cannabis industry by managing one of the first 25 retail stores that won the lottery, and that's where actually Lisa and Brian, co-owners of Stok'd, do come in. They were one of the first actual 25 lottery winners, and so we were able to open up Choom, and it's public knowledge that there was a deal at the end, and Lisa parted ways from Choom, and that's where Stok'd kind of was born from. So a couple months after that, we were just having a friendly discussion because we stayed friends, and it came up where both of us might have an interest in working together again. So explored that and decided to come up here and help launch Stok'd. So currently right now we got two stores, one on Kingston Road in Scarborough and one on Pharmacy Ave in Scarborough. And what's really exciting is hopefully by the end of February, just COVID and construction, there'll be a Niagara store where it all started popping up. So we're really excited to bring it back and really get back to our roots and pay homage to Niagara and say thanks for allowing us to really create something special. So here's to you guys.
That's awesome. So it's really coming full circle for you guys there. That's awesome. Well, no, it's great to have you. And Stok'd, I really like the concept, the whole kind of Canadiana vibe that you guys bring to kind of the retail space. I think is awesome. And Lisa too, always sharing great insight as well on Twitter. So a huge fan of hers on there as well. I'm really excited to talk to you today about inventory management best practices. So I think this is a huge part of working in the cannabis retail environment, whether you're a store owner, manager, bud tender. Really inventory management is such a critical component of all of this. So I think it's a great place to start and to really kind of share some insight in terms of, really how to properly approach that side of the cannabis industry. So I wanted just to start off by just kind of asking you, so what are some of the major differences kind of between regular retail business and within kind of the cannabis retail environment?
Well, I think that the first one is really shelf life. This product just, closely like food, really has a unique benchmark that you should really find. I think the sweet spot right now is about 7 days on hand. And that's really taking a page out of, the street dealer's book too. Like back in the day, we really didn't want to be sitting on a pound for more than a week per se. Right. So you can really help translate that into cannabis retail, where if you have sort of like a 7-day benchmark, it really allows you to flow through your inventory. As we all know, cannabis dries out as long as it sits. Right. So to really keep that newness, freshness and continuous ordering practices, I really think just focusing on that shelf life and that key benchmark of 7 days really helps kind of, you assess what you really need to either buy down or buy up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure kind of getting product in and out the door, right, is critical. And now in terms of kind of like the regulatory landscape that a cannabis retail business falls under, do you find that becomes a pretty critical component as well, and something that maybe not a lot of other retailers necessarily have to deal with and think about?
Yeah, I really think it allows for less shrinkage and loss prevention. Having to do that, monthly count and submit your numbers federally and to the provincial wholesaler, really helps keeps retailers accountable for a controlled substance. Like a sweater is not a controlled substance, etc. And I'm sure there are proper inventory practices in other industries, but cannabis, I think it really helps with those regulatory laws that allow us to really keep a closer eye on our product and make sure that the right product's going out and nothing is missing from our shelves without it being accounted for as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and could you describe kind of that inventory audit process a little bit? Because there are like the required, weekly physical inventory counts, right? And then there's the monthly reporting, obviously, like you mentioned. So what are kind of some best practices in that regard? Because I've heard everything from stores, sometimes doing this every day, just to keep up, and just to make sure they don't fall behind, because checking back on the cameras and that sort of thing, a week later to figure out where maybe a product went missing. So what are maybe some of the best practices that you've learned over the last months and years, like working in the space, that have really kind of paid dividends?
Well, there's got to be, technology, obviously, that helps you kind of control that, but there's also got to be human fail safes. So I'll kind of rewind it all the way back to the beginning when everybody didn't know, nobody knew what was going on. Nobody knew how to really implement cannabis inventory management and cannabis auditory practices, right? So, while I was traveling around to different dispensaries, I kind of noticed, even at my own, like at the end of the sale, there was something missing, right? It just didn't seem like it was a full sale. So what I had noticed was people were just dispensing. They weren't selling or storytelling. It was, you cashed out and then a back person in there filled your product, you got your bag and you left. You didn't even know what was in your bag. So at the end of my travel, I kind of came up with what's called the 3 Ps. So at the end of each sale, like at Stok'd, you kind of have to go through a product. And when someone buys it, before you put it in the bag, you go, this is the 7 acres, Jack Hayes, coming in at this percentage, this many grams in the bag. So even after you've scanned it, you have that human fail-safe where now you have to kind of reiterate it back to the consumer. So if you have grabbed the wrong bag, you've caught yourself. Right? So you can go in there before the transaction is complete and change your wrong. Now, what that does also is keeps the bud tender accountable for proper inventory management, right? So combined with trying to figure out what your, fail safe is for human error, and combining it with, real technology, i.e. scanners, right, really helps manage less inventory mistakes, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And what does that process look like? Like, let's say you do the physical count, you look at it, it's not lining up in the POS system. What are kind of some of the steps then that are taken, some of those initial steps to figure that out?
So first off is, if you have multiple SKUs from the same brand, go right there first. 9 times out of 10, it's given out as, let's say, the Pink Kush instead of the Jet Fuel Gelato, where it was supposed to be the Jet Fuel Gelato. So you can kind of correct your inventory management right there, just by either, and especially if they're the same price, you can kind of sell that one bag as the Pink Kush, even though it was given out wrong. That's kind of the cheater's way. Essentially, you would go into the back end and say, okay, missold 1 for 1, and claim it as an audit, and that would be reported on your month's end. And it would just be known as a missold, but the first step would be to go to that existing brand with multiple SKUs, count out those SKUs first, and see if one was missold as the other. Then if that's not the case, I would definitely have them come in either that night or that morning and do specifically that subcategory, so it doesn't overload the counters or the people taking care of the inventory, and then really kind of assess, was it either stolen, what happened, and then go from there. So it really allows you to break down a 3,000-foot bridge into 300 feet pieces and really assess your problem from there and figure out where you need to add more cement or another beam, right?
Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're probably right in the sense that you want to set up those practices of acknowledging human error and trying to prevent that as much as possible right from the start, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I guess what are some of like the most common mistakes, and you kind of alluded to a few there, but what are some of the common mistakes that typically do lead to like inventory discrepancies, and any kind of suggestions on how to avoid them? You mentioned one there of really like double checking the product and having a system in place for that double check, but anything else and other kind of common mistakes that you see?
Well, I'll use this especially for online and deliveries. So before it goes out the door and it's been signed off on that it's properly picked, the other person that working on shift that didn't pick it will go through the bag to make sure that the corresponding products match the receipt that it's supposed to go in. Now, does that happen where there's the C to B interaction? Not necessarily. So it's a little harder to hold people accountable right there in the moment. So that's why we've implemented, like I said, the 3P. So it really holds you accountable after reading out each product. You should be scanning it. So at least, the wrong product will be sold and not have to go back in and do an audit.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like I said, the combination between, just you and that scanner, your scanner's your best friend behind the till.
Yeah.
A lot of stores, it kind of blows my mind. I'm like, where are your scanners?
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, how common do you think that is? Because it just seemed like a really no-brainer that would prevent like so many potential issues, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of hybrid models out there where a lot of stores are the dispensing type, like where there's a picker in the back, so it negates kind of any scanning because you can really just plop on the screen, the receipt goes to the back, and then the bag comes out the front, right? So even there, and then there's a lot of mistakes happening where per se that 3Ps would come into play because somebody else picked it. You got to check it. It's almost like a bag check, right? Because it's so scrutinized and we have these regulatory laws, there should be multiple interactions where in that case, the product is handled and ensure that the right product is in the bag, right? Some practices like Stok'd, where it's not a dispensing type like model, where it's a more drawer like type model and it's actually on the bud tender. It's a little harder, right? So it really holds them accountable. And if you really kind of single it down to a few people just taking care of or inventory management, it mitigates any kind of risk and it mitigates any kind of runaround where you can go right to the source and say, okay, what have you found and what do we need to go back and change? So through that, there's always opinions and improvements through those people that are firsthand counting the inventory, right? So it's a combination. It's really a major combination.
So that's interesting. So you actually, and it makes sense, but delegate like specific kind of inventory management responsibilities sometimes. Is that even something you'd maybe recommend having like a particular role, like specifically?
On a larger scale? Yeah, for big box retails, 100%. I mean, now that I've kind of had the pleasure of working at a larger scale retail and then obviously a smaller scale retailer, you really see that you need specific people in specific roles to really handle that because then what it does is it really allows that role to be perfected and then trained upon, right? So and the ROI on one person getting trained as opposed to 4 or 5, you get a lot more back from one person, I find, because 5 people do it 5 different ways. So if you have one person where you can help develop that specific way and then bring maybe 1 or 2 people on, should say someone be sick or need the day off, there's a substitute, right? So you kind of have to be prepared for that too. But essentially there really should be a key point for inventory management, and it really should come down to the purchaser as well. So with that, it's hard to really say, but definitely bigger box retails, even in store, especially if you're still only doing 10K a week, 15K a week, your discrepancies can get quite high, right? I've seen it where they can get quite high, not necessarily here because it's obviously a smaller retailer, but back in the day when retailers were doing $200,000 weeks, you can imagine how many mistakes were made. And then, putting in those small little practices over time really decrease it down to a minimal shrinkage, right? So you were just like, guys, it was really what's the word? We weren't really paying attention, right? So people weren't really paying attention, and what that does is now it allows them to pay attention. So it really helps mitigate that risk.
Mm-hmm. And I guess just a quick aside, when it comes to doing the physical inventory count and delivery and receiving product, do you have any thoughts on whether like trying to align the physical count before a delivery or after a delivery?
Depends on what day it lines up with. Generally, if you're doing your spot check every week, and I always suggest switching the day up just to keep people on their toes as well, because you never know. You don't want to, assume people are taking anything, but at the end of the day, it just really helps that person kind of, sporadically count as well. So as long as you keep up on it and you do your proper intake when the inventory comes through, so you check it, you make sure all the boxes are there, number, etc. It really is down to the retailer, right? So just being prepared, I would say, is probably the best practice, whether it be before or after. But nonetheless, it's really depending on how you see fit.
Okay. No, that makes sense. And I guess so. Something you kind of mentioned at the start was sell-through rate. So do you want to elaborate like a little bit more on that and how that kind of impacts your particular approach to inventory management?
Yeah, so I mean, you definitely, and I think I have a leg up on a lot of, like, say, purchaser and inventory management roles, because I'm actually in both stores a lot. I'm lucky to be fairly close to both locations where I can spend a lot of time watching the product and seeing the product being sold rather than what the data on the back end's telling me. Because, and it's a little unorthodox, but I find that there is a physical story and an analytical story, and sometimes they don't correlate with each other. Right. So your dollars might say you might have a lot in a certain subcategory, but you don't realize until you get to the store that it's all big bags. Right. And we all know that big bag case size now usually come in 6 size case, if that, 4 to 6. Right. So being able to physically see what's being sold as the story is being told, I think I definitely have a unique tool that allows me to really assess what's moving fast, what's not moving fast. And then through that, really dialing into what I need to buy up on and what I need to buy back on. And then what that really does is allow you to really mitigate any kind of discounts, any kind of markdowns. It allows you not to throw dollars away. And not to say that that's not bad, but if you want to essentially throw dollars away, it should be out of your own accord to say thank you to your customers, not because you have to move something, right? Like, cannabis should be moving efficiently enough where you shouldn't have to do that. And because there's nothing in this industry yet to say how to do that, you have retailers sitting on hundreds of thousands of inventory, but yet they're still buying sales the next week, right? No one's realizing that, okay, I sold only 35K this week, let's say, right? But I bought 50. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or I can't buy anything because I have 75 still tied up in stuff that hasn't moved in 3 months. Why hasn't it moved in 3 months? No one's paying attention to it because we have such a wide selection that product gets lost. So now it comes down to a curated menu as well, which really helps you kind of assess what is needed and what is not needed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is interesting. And how much for you is it kind of being in the store, being on the floor, that sort of thing, seeing the inventory in its kind of physical state versus kind of analyzing and crunching the numbers, maybe using, whether it's the POS system or sometimes people rely on things like headset and stuff like that to do those customer analytics. Is it really kind of a balance between both of those things? Do you see, a bit more on kind of being in the store, like just paying off a bit more on that side of things? Is that kind of what you're getting at too?
Yeah, I yes, 100%. I definitely would say, being in store, having somebody as your eyes in store is definitely a leg up on kind of the data side. Don't get me wrong, headset's a great tool. I use it a lot recently. Now that I'm starting to understand more of it, and they're really starting to dial in on some key pieces that, you know, inventory management is needed for that, right? So it's definitely been a great secondary tool. But because I'm so used to being in stores, it kind of comes naturally now, and that's not the case amongst a lot of other retailers, right? So I would definitely say it's a balance of both, but you need to know the physical story to really assess your numbers that are being shown through the data, right? Especially with like Greenline and the way it kind of integrates with a lot of stuff, it doesn't really dial that far in. You're kind of left to like the subcategories. So let's say it's like sativa, indica. You don't know how much of that really is like a 14 gram or 13 or 15 gram or an ounce or etc. Right. So to be able to go into the store and say, okay, well, my report last night says I had 9K in sitting inventory, right? And I come and it's maybe 4 cases of pink kush ounces. Well, I know that I sell 4 cases a week. So my days on hand right there, it's a perfect amount for 7 days. I don't need to buy up. I don't need to buy down, because now I've gotten that sweet spot of, you know, 4 cases. And at that time, back in the day, 4 cases was 96 units. So my rule of thumb was hot sellers don't go more than 4 cases, because 96 units in a week is pretty good, right? There's no retailer selling more than 5 or 6 cases a week right now, even with the saturation, right? So to be able to have those sweet spots on case numbers as well really helps you kind of assess what your, you know, your core products are, your MBOs, your 20 percenters. But even your 20 percenters will change from monthly basis, on a monthly basis, or even a 3-month basis, 6-month basis, etc. But it's cannabis. We're not where, you know, it's a taste profile. It's something always changing. We're not going back to the same pair of fit jeans or shoes, the style. We like a certain style. We don't really branch out of that. With cannabis, it's more of like, you know, a restaurant. We want to go to a different restaurant almost, you know, once a month, not trying to eat the same thing every time. Yeah, we have our favorites and we try to go as much as we can, but we also like to try other things. Right. So that, like, combined with everything, I think being able to have somebody in the store telling you the physical story, that helps correlate with the data that's being shown. But it's also the person that's looking at the data needs to listen to the physical story. Just because the numbers are saying one thing doesn't mean that the physical story is saying another. Right. So I really think a combination of both tools really will help people dial in better.
And just to kind of elaborate on that idea of menu curation. So you hear a lot about this idea that we're all selling the same thing, right? We're all buying from the OCS, the wholesaler, and therefore essentially that turns into, you know, you could say all stores selling the same product. But, you know, the menu on the OCS is pretty extensive. Like there are a bunch of SKUs on there, and, you know, retailers generally, some are carrying a certain product, others are carrying another. You know, what are your thoughts on that? Do you see a lot of, like, still a lot of room to grow in that area in terms of like when the new drops are coming? You know, is that still an exciting time? You know, are you still looking kind of constantly to find new things for the store and new things that people will get excited about? Like, I assume that that's like a pretty integral part, right, of keeping that menu and that inventory fresh in a lot of ways. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, is it as dire as people kind of make it seem? Is there still, you know, potential to make yourself unique in that sense, and still stand out when it comes to kind of that menu selection side of things?
Yeah. I really think there is, like you said, Connor, there's a plethora of products to choose from. Not everybody has to grab the same top 10 products that are presented to you in a spreadsheet, right? That's really where a lot of them get you, is saying, you know, these products are the top 10 products in your region, grab them and people will come. Well, that's not necessarily true. It's like a gas station. We all pretty much charge the same price for gas, right? Maybe 1 or cents two more. Why are you going to go over there when it's the same price over here? It's convenience of it too. So with the saturated market, it becomes a convenience thing. But also there's really room to to establish niches, even early on, right? So those retailers that are really curating their menus have already set themselves up for a niche, right? With a plethora of craft products right now, for an example, you could easily change your mind in your business plan to being like, we're strictly a craft store. If it doesn't have a craft designation, it doesn't come on. Now that gives you room to charge a little more, be a premium retailer. I don't know. But what that does do is that now says that you are a craft retailer. You are not just a cannabis retailer, you're a craft cannabis retailer. So that sets a standard, that sets a precedence for your menu, for your clientele, for the offerings that you have. And this way, the story that you tell your customers is easier. Stuff that they can relate to, where you're not dipping your toe into every different pond saying, oh, I got this, and I got this, and I got this, and I got this. But if you say I got this, this, and this, a lot more people will respond to the 3s than the 10s, right? So I really think there's room for niche menus and niche store idealisms. And then you have a whole section of wellness, of CBD products that people use regular products like every day that just don't contain a cannabinoid. So if you can transition, convert, capture these new clients that haven't really explored that cannabinoid side yet, now you've just niched yourself up for a wellness store. Yeah, it might be a little early to say so to do so, but someone's got to start pushing the brink and setting the tone and etc. So what Stok'd's really allowed me to do is really set that niche for a curated menu. People know that you're not going to find everything here. You may find a few things that my neighbor sells, right? But nonetheless, I set the precedence for, you can only find certain products on the Stok'd menu because other retailers don't take the chance on it. They don't have the room for it. They aren't aware of it. They haven't seen it because it's been around since the beginning, and these new retailers are only focused on the new and upcoming, right? So there's a few products that really allow you to even just draw people in for the differentiation because they can't find it anywhere else. Now, if you stock everything and everything, then that comment comes true. We're all the same. But if you don't stock everything and say, hey, these are the reasons why I don't, and these are the reasons why I stock these, it really allows you to dive deeper into what your store is all about.
Mm-hmm. And something that'll probably get just better and better over time, right?
Yep.
So that's I think what's kind of exciting, and because I think you can do a lot in terms of creating like a great concept and like a great idea, and I think most cannabis stores, like, you feel safe and comfortable walking into them, right? But I think that other side of it is that, like, that curation side and that, like, relationship with the staff and the bud tenders and the recommendations that they make, and like you said, the interesting kind of brand stories you can tell as well, whether it's the store itself or the brands that you carry. So that's always, to me, kind of the most interesting thing about how like a retailer could stand out. And even like little things too, I have seen go a long way, just like labeling, like the way you kind of display products in the stores and how you label them and that sort of thing. And putting your own kind of stamp of approval maybe on products and having staff picks, and those little things can really go a long way, right?
Yeah, and culturally speaking, new drops are everything. How excited do we get back in the day when we heard about our cult followings? Like, these guys are dropping something, like, I gotta find it, I gotta get it. And, even remember when the tuna can started coming around, you're like, I gotta get on the tuna can. I need a tuna can, right? So I think, back to, one of your questions, like, culturally, just the excitement around that. And if you're a retailer that comes from that culture, you know how to excite your staff, or at least I hope you do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because that's what it was all about then, was, that new news drop in, like, we need it, right? So it was, and I think that translates here, because if you get your clients excited, if you get your customers excited a week before, and you say, hey, by the way, there's going to be a whole new menu next week. Well, what do you mean? All new stuff for you to try. Awesome. You watch, that week will be one of your best weeks of the month, because you've already built that excitement. It's not just a, hey, we got new products today, come through. No, you got to keep, it's about a week planning. So you just tell everybody a week and watch it translate into a good return.
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's something bud tenders should really take note about. Like those are the kind of bud tenders that really like crush those sales numbers, right? It's the ones who are just naturally like, oh, you need to check out the new peanut butter bread that we just got in. And also we're getting, some of this down there, right? Like just those types of conversations, just that kind of as if it just naturally flows into that, right? It doesn't come off as a sales pitch. It comes off as you're just like genuinely excited and genuinely kind of a connoisseur on the product itself. And I think that kind of just naturally translates to higher sales, like you said, right? So bud tenders should definitely be kind of in that mindset of not being, it's not like being a salesman, but it's again, it's just being kind of naturally curious and excited, right?
Yeah, so I mean, like every bud tender at Stok'd is not considered a salesperson. We're considered storytellers.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, with cannabis, if you substitute selling with storytelling, it becomes an art.
Mm-hmm.
I literally give you a high-tech paintbrush and an easel. You get to paint the picture. Simple as that. And I even think that translates to even help me with inventory management because they're so excited that they don't just become order takers, they're order makers. And they really allow they really allow people to leave here with a basket of offerings. It's not just like, oh, I only got $40. Okay, here's a $40 ace. It's like, what can I find you for $40?
Mm-hmm.
And if bud tenders start thinking of like that, it makes the inventory person's job a lot more easier because more stuff is selling at once. And that's retail.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that was great. That was perfect way to bring it all back around and to connect it again to the inventory side of things, which I think we learned, or at least I did learn a ton today. So really appreciate you, Francesco, sharing your insights with us, with the Cannabis 360 community. I really think there's a tons of kind of really impactful and useful information in there that you just shared with us. So I really, really appreciate you taking the time to go over that with us. And yeah, excited to have you back. And we'll definitely be having more conversations around cannabis retail and best practices like we had today. So thanks again, man. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure speaking with you today, Connor, as always. And looking forward to the next one for sure.
Looking forward to it as well.